Chapter 8. The Revived Roman Empire. Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev is driven by a passion to see the Soviet Union and its former satellites become part of a new united Europe, and then a united socialist world of freedom and peace. How long this incredible and un-Marxist dream had obsessed Gorbachev before he at last felt the time was ripe to make it public in his 1987 book, Perestroika, New Thinking for Our Country and the World, we do not know. Emboldened by that book's enthusiastic reception, he vigorously expressed and updated his dream in his historic speech to the General Assembly of the United Nations in December 1988. It was the first time a Soviet president had addressed that world body in 25 years. The cultured and convincing delivery by Time magazine's 1980s Man of the Decade was a far cry from Khrushchev's crude tirade before that same body when he emphasized his points by pounding the lectern with his shoe. Gorbachev's speech was a public relations masterpiece. He caught everyone off guard by announcing a unilateral reduction of Soviet troops stationed in Eastern Europe and appealing for a renunciation of the use of military force in international relations. Warning that closed societies would fail, he called for the democratization of every nation and the universal reconciliation of basic human rights and full freedom for every individual. Most Westerners thought Gorbachev was just spouting more of the same old propaganda. The Soviet leader, with a straight face, calling for democratization of every nation? Stop joking! And condemning closed societies to failure? Wasn't that a description of his own country? Few of his listeners that day would have believed that the closed societies of Eastern Europe would indeed have all failed and fallen within a year of that prophetic pronouncement, but nearly everyone has since then become a believer in Gorbachev and in his revolutionary proposals, which do not stop with Europe, but extend to the entire world. How I wish that some of the old-time preachers from my youth could be alive today. They would be thrilled to see the developing revival of the Roman Empire of which they spoke with such confidence 50 years ago. They would also, I believe, see their mistake in interpreting the 10 toes of Nebuchadnezzar's image, Daniel 2, verses 31 through 45, as 10 nations in Western Europe. We have already noted that both recent events and the facts of history require a much larger view of what those 10 toes represent. At the peak of its power, ancient Rome controlled territories far beyond Western Europe. In addition, there were Greece, Turkey, and parts of what used to be East Germany, as well as much of Hungary, Romania, Yugoslavia, Albania, Bulgaria, Soviet Armenia, and other parts of the Soviet Union around the Black Sea. The Caesars' ancient empire also took in Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Jordan, Egypt, and the Mediterranean coastal areas of North Africa, all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. It was simply a mistake ever to equate the revived Roman Empire with a theoretical 10-nation confederacy in Western Europe. What is the justification, however, for extending this empire of the Antichrist far beyond the actual area controlled by the Caesars? There are many reasons. The Caesars ruled the world of their day, so it would make sense that the Antichrist, heading a revived form of the Caesars' empire, would rule the world of his day, which now includes all nations. But isn't it presumptuous to leave out the largest portion of the earth, including the great ancient civilizations in India and China, in referring to the Roman Empire as the world of its day? Again, there are good reasons for doing so. The Bible itself refers to the 4 kingdoms represented by Nebuchadnezzar's image as ruling over all the earth, Daniel 2, verse 39. So, we must view ancient Rome as a world empire if we are to adopt the biblical perspective. It then follows that the revived Roman Empire will be a world empire also. What that means in the world of the last days is stated very clearly. Power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations, and all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him. Revelation 13, verses 7 and 8. As we've already pointed out, these verses state explicitly that the Antichrist will rule over and be worshipped by the entire world. There can be little doubt, for reasons already given, that the nations of the world will eventually all unite. As we have also noted, it makes little sense, particularly in light of the plain statements of Scripture, that the Antichrist would rule over only a small part of a united world. Furthermore, as Václav Havel, newly elected president of Czechoslovakia, pointed out in a major article written early in 1990 for U.S. News and World Report, quote, "Europe has been the cradle of a civilization that has shaped the history of the world for the last 2,000 years. The spiritual impulses of antiquity, Judaism, and Christianity merged into a force that has forged the world as we know it. European civilization discovered, explored, conquered, and dominated other continents, other civilizations. It has brought European thinking, enterprise, and inventions to the remotest corners of the earth." Unquote. These colonial nations not only spread European culture and ideas around the globe, but also Christianized their colonies. Thus the foundation was laid worldwide for the apostate Christian church that will follow the Antichrist, thinking that he is Christ. It is this spiritual impulse, as Havel calls it, which more than anything else links the entire world back to ancient Rome. This is the most important connection, as we shall see. The revival of the Roman Empire begins with the uniting of Europe and moves out from there, following the pattern of ancient Rome and her conquests, and then that of the colonial era. We can see this pattern emerging now in one of the most important developments in this century for the fulfillment of last days prophecies. The quote-unquote democratization of Eastern Europe now underway is following Gorbachev's scenario, and it has opened the door for East and West to be united in a new and much larger Europe than almost anyone else had dared to envision. It was in Perestroika that he first proposed what at that time seemed either an insane fantasy or pure propaganda: a Europe that would be united from the Atlantic to the Urals. The one other leader who shared Gorbachev's incredible vision in those days was none other than Pope John Paul II. In 1987, while performing a mass for 55,000 people outside Speyer, Germany's massive 900-year-old cathedral, he too appealed for a united Europe, from the Atlantic to the Urals. After the Berlin Wall crumbled and communism collapsed in Eastern Europe, others also began to take up the same theme. Early in 1990, about 2 weeks after re-establishing ties with the Vatican, following a break in relations of 40 years, Hungary's Foreign Minister Gyula Horn proposed that Eastern European nations join NATO's political councils, an idea that was utterly unthinkable in the past. He went on to say, quote, "I would like to stress that a united democratic Europe is our goal. We need to act on this. To that end, a lot of things have to be rethought." Unquote. In the same article quoted above, Václav Havel went on to state, quote, "For more than 40 years there has been not one Europe, but at least two. One is the Europe of the West, the land of democracies and relative prosperity. The other is the Europe of the East, of totalitarianism until recently unchallenged, the Europe that is finally awakened." Then the tide turned, paving the way for the enormous changes in Eastern Europe that we have recently witnessed. Europeans in the West have made clear their intention to overcome national, political, and geographical barriers and to enter the next millennium as a single community. Europeans in the East have made equally clear their interest in joining this community of free nations." Unquote. To Gorbachev must go most of the credit for the enormous changes in Eastern Europe. The infamous Berlin Wall is no more. There is no longer any barrier between what used to be East and West Germany. They have become one again, something that most analysts could not have foreseen for at least 100 years, if ever. But this is only the beginning. Not only is Europe changing, but the entire world as a result. All of this and so much more that the future now holds in store is the result of one man's vision and one man's astonishing courage to stand up against the fierce opposition within the Soviet hierarchy to his innovative perestroika and glasnost. The amazing result was the end of the long-standing Cold War and the new hope for peace that world leaders now express. Yes, much credit must also go to President Reagan for keeping the U.S. military machine strong in spite of heavy domestic opposition and for standing firm on equitable disarmament. Much credit is also due to President Bush, not only for continuing to negotiate with the Soviets from strength rather than weakness, but also for being quick to recognize the changes that Gorbachev was seeking to effect and for responding with friendship and trust. Without Gorbachev at the helm of the Soviet Union, however, the Kremlin might well have decided that because of its economically hopeless situation, its only option in its rivalry with the West was war. Instead, we now have a new and previously unbelievable partnership between the United States and the Soviet Union, a partnership that is working for the mutual interests of worldwide peace and unity. There now seems little doubt that the division between East and West Europe has ended, and that it is only a matter of time and implementation until Europe will indeed be united from the Atlantic to the Urals. But that isn't all. Something much larger is in process. With the Eastern Bloc joining the West and receiving an influx of investment capital and business and farming expertise, the resulting European community will have the power to dominate the world. At some point, everyone will want to join for economic and security reasons. After the church has been taken to heaven and his power has been consolidated, the Antichrist will use force to maintain his rule. His kingdom will eventually explode in war between rival factions at Armageddon, but first the foundation must be laid, which current events seem to be doing. The new united Germany has called for the United States and Canada to form a new transatlantic partnership, bolstered by a treaty to complete the work of ending East-West divisions in Europe. Japan and other Asian nations are preparing to negotiate their relationship to the new Europe. Again, Gorbachev turns out to be a prophet, for in that same United Nations speech he had called for the adoption of a new economic system as the key to a new and united world of peace and prosperity. The first Moscow envoy to speak at a U.S. college commencement, departing Soviet ambassador Yuri V. Dubinin, told the May 1990 graduates of George Washington University's Elliott School of International Affairs that the Cold War is obsolete and that now the Soviet Union and the United States think of each other not as adversaries but as partners. Dubinin told the graduates that they must participate in shaping a new international order. We have already quoted The Spectator, London's conservative weekly, in reference to the new larger Europe that promises to unite East and West. Quote, "We are taking the first steps toward an ecumenical community that will ultimately spread to all corners of our planet." Unquote. Globalism. The very thought used to evoke in thinking Christians the horrifying image of the Antichrist ruling the world. But now such a reaction is looked upon, even in many Christian circles, as a paranoid carryover from an Antichrist phobia that inhibited progress. It is now generally taken for granted that the world must be united under some form of binding association that supersedes national boundaries and loyalties. The necessity for this new unity grows more urgent each day, not only to prevent World War III with its inevitable global destruction, but to rescue the entire planet from the brink of ecological collapse. There are also economic and banking reasons for unifying the world which are equally compelling. Unless one is a Christian and really believes that either Christ or Antichrist must rule the world, nothing makes better sense than a one-world government in some benign form. Consequently, we may expect an increasing and less subtle promotion of one-worldism throughout our society, from the highest levels of government to the classrooms of our youngest children. As the National Education Association has said, quote, "It is with sobering awareness that we set about to change the course of American education for the 21st century by embracing the ideals of global community, the equality and interdependence of all peoples and nations, and education as a tool to bring about world peace." Unquote. Even forgetting the Antichrist, there are obvious moral consequences to making the world one. An integral part of the new global education is, as Alan Bloom warns in The Closing of the American Mind, quote, "to force students to recognize that there are other ways of thinking, in order to establish a world community and train its members, the person devoid of prejudice." Unquote. Bloom's use of prejudice is tongue-in-cheek, for in the new community there can be no moral absolutes. It must be labeled prejudice to suggest that one point of view must be right and another wrong, particularly with regard to religion. There must be absolutely no absolutes, for such dogmatism would destroy global unity. So Linda Falkenstein of Northwest Regional Educational Laboratory argues, quote, "Black and white answers probably never really existed. But the time is long past when even the myth can endure. Competent world citizens must act in the large zone of grays where absolutes are absent." Unquote. The most dangerous part of global education is its teaching about religion. It is especially in this area that the planners realize they must eliminate prejudice and introduce tolerance for all beliefs. Thus, the new curriculum in American public schools calls for teaching not religion, which is forbidden, but about it, in a comparative study of the world's religions. Soviet schools also, where atheism once reigned, plan a similar religious studies program. Evangelical leaders have joined liberals and atheists in endorsing such globalist education programs as the Williamsburg Charter. Its curriculum in public schools across America, which is calculated to make global citizens for the New World Order, will teach students that all religious beliefs are to be tolerated. It is an easy step, especially in a child's mind, from tolerance to acceptance. Teachers, of course, cannot even suggest that one religion might be wrong and another right, much less that only one could be right. It will be only logical for the students to conclude that all must be equally valid. Therefore, one's choice of religion doesn't really matter, since there is no such thing as right and wrong, a concept they have been taught for years in the area of morals through such programs as values clarification. It is the perfect preparation for the Antichrist's ecumenical world religion. Forming a partnership between all religions is, of course, foundational to the creation of global citizens and the Antichrist's world government. Political unity is impractical when religious barriers still divide. In Learning for Tomorrow, The Role of the Future in Education, Wendell Bell makes it clear that the demise of superstition and cultural absolutes is necessary in order to unshackle humankind for the new world of the future. To create the new world citizen, it is necessary to remove all prejudice against the beliefs which other people may hold. This fact is forgotten by Christians in their excitement over the new freedom of conscience being offered. Focus on the Family Citizen enthusiastically reports that Gorbachev has publicly admitted to Pope John Paul II that his nation needs Christian moral values. But what does he mean? Gorbachev's promotion of spiritual values must be taken in the context of his warnings against outmoded dogmas. In an obvious affront to the one who is the Alpha and Omega, Revelation 1 verse 8, he stated at his June 1990 reunion with Ronald Reagan in San Francisco, where tolerance has borne such deadly fruit as AIDS, quote, "Everything must change. Tolerance is the Alpha and Omega of a new world order," unquote. Evangelical Christianity is already recognized as the enemy of the new freedom of conscience and must either change or be outlawed because it expresses what is considered to be the ultimate intolerance, that Jesus Christ is the only Savior of the world and that all must believe in Him or be eternally lost. Yet church leaders, both Protestant and Catholic, are jumping on the one world bandwagon, which can only be held together by tolerance for all beliefs. As early as 1970, the Lutheran Church in America adopted an official position statement titled World Community, Ethical Imperatives in an Age of Interdependence. Under the heading Toward a Global Civil Order, it advocated the establishment of world and regional institutions to implement a new world order. The National Conference of Catholic Bishops similarly expressed its support for globalism in a recent pastoral letter. Quote, "We are now entering an era of new global interdependence requiring global systems of governance to manage the resulting conflicts. These growing tensions cannot be remedied by a single nation-state approach. They shall require the concerted effort of the whole world community," unquote. If the Catholic bishops, the Pope, and many Protestant leaders as well are in favor of it, then why not join all nations together in one global brotherhood? Why should a world government be evil in and of itself, and why must the Antichrist rule over it? With the threat of a global communist takeover removed, it would appear that the uniting of the world will not, as once thought, come about by the forceful imposition of an ideology, but by a voluntary association of those who are tolerant of one another's differences. It sounds like the fulfillment of Daniel's prophecy that the revived Roman Empire would be iron mixed with clay. Indeed, the clay of democracy emerging out of communist dictatorships to form the new international socialism adds an element of persuasion that plays an important part in the deception. The iron of fading totalitarianism must be mingled with the miry clay of democracy for the Roman Empire to be revived. It is happening. So what is the significance of the revival of the ancient Roman Empire? Why this empire instead of another? What function will Rome play, if any? The answers to those questions bring us to the heart of the matter. Here again is where the plot thickens. It is fascinating, first of all, to notice that ancient Rome did indeed serve more than one function concerning Christ's first advent. For example, it was Roman execution by crucifixion that caused Jesus to die in the manner prophesied by David. "All my bones are out of joint." That is characteristic of crucifixion. "They pierced my hands and my feet. They part my garments among them, and cast lots upon my vesture." Psalm 22, verses 14 through 18. As in his death, so in his birth, Rome played an integral part as well. And it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. And all went to be taxed, every one into his own city. And Joseph also went up from Galilee unto the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be taxed with Mary his espoused wife, being great with child. And so it was that while they were there, she brought forth her firstborn son. Luke 2, verses 1 through 7. Interesting. It was a decree of the Roman Empire, which therefore had to be in existence for Christ to come to earth, that put Joseph and Mary in Bethlehem at just the right time for Jesus to be born there in fulfillment of the prophecy that every rabbi had to acknowledge was messianic. "But thou, Bethlehem Ephratah, though thou be little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of thee shall he come forth unto me that is to be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth have been from of old, from everlasting." Micah 5, verse 2. Yet Jesus Christ, in spite of being born in Bethlehem and fulfilling all other criteria which the Hebrew prophets had set forth concerning the coming Messiah, did not rule over Israel when he came 1900 years ago. His people rejected him as their king and instead crucified him, an event which was also foretold by the Hebrew prophets. Obviously, Jesus Christ must return to this earth to sit on David's throne in Jerusalem and reign over Israel and the world if biblical prophecies are to be fulfilled. When will that be? In the days of those kings, said Daniel. The kings that are represented by the 10 toes of iron and clay, who comprise the revived Roman Empire. It is only fitting that Christ should return when the empire which played such an important role in his first advent has been revived to become the world empire of its day once again. It is also fitting that he should return to destroy the empire that crucified him and destroyed Jerusalem, and which in its revived form will seek to destroy Israel totally. Moreover, the Roman Empire must be revived for the Antichrist to rule over it. His subjects, the people of the prince that shall come, would crucify Christ again if they could. Indeed, their armies not only seek to destroy Israel, but will knowingly fight against Christ, Revelation 19:19, when he returns for a face-to-face confrontation with the Antichrist, destroys his counterfeit world empire, and begins his millennial reign of righteousness. There is another element that must not be overlooked. The Roman Empire was not only a political, economic, and military entity, it was highly religious as well. In fact, religion played a dominant role both before and after Rome was Christianized. Therefore, if that ancient empire is indeed to be revived, then its religion must be revived as well, for it has a vital role to play in causing the world to accept and worship the Antichrist. To fulfill the prophesied last days criteria, the revived Roman Empire must include 2 vital religious elements from its past. First of all, it must be ruled by a new pagan emperor, who will be worshipped as God. Such was the case in the days of the early church. During periodic waves of persecution against Christians, all who refused to worship an image of the emperor as God were killed. The Bible leaves no doubt that even this seemingly extreme aspect of ancient Rome's religion will be revived. That they should make an image to the beast, that is Antichrist, and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. Revelation 13, verses 14 and 15. That there must also be a restoration of the close working relationship that existed between the popes and the emperors seems to be clear from the same passage. It is the miracle-working second beast in Revelation 13, clearly a religious figure and commonly known as the false prophet, who causeth the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, that is, Antichrist. Verse 12. He is the one who makes the image of the first beast and decrees the death of those who refuse to worship it. The false prophet must be the head of the world church, identified in Revelation 17 as Mystery Babylon. Even Catholic apologist Carl Keating admits that Babylon signifies Rome. The current pope, John Paul II, is working feverishly to merge all faiths. He obviously understands that not only Protestants and Catholics, but all mankind must unite in a new world religion.